Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I have some romance book recommendations. If you liked this book, try this one type style, and so let's just get right into it. So if you've never watched one of these videos before, mostly I just recommend a book based on, say, if you liked the Ex Hex, you'll like this book, and most of it, honestly, is just based on vibes. Some of it is like plot points were similar or just like the general storyline was maybe similar, but a lot of it is just like reading these two books gave me the same vibes, the same feelings, and so like if you really loved one, you may really love the other. And so the first one is going to be The Ex Hex by Erin Sterling. This is, I feel like this was the first like witchy rom-com that kind of went like really like mainstream, like really everybody was picking this up. And I did like this, like don't get me wrong, I did really enjoy this. I love Halloween Town, I love like the cozy sort of Halloween spooky season vibes. So I did enjoy this, but I loved Go Hex Yourself by Jessica Clare. This book is so cool and just like so different, and definitely like also gave Halloween Town vibes, like they both kind of do. This one follows a girl who thinks that she has accidentally like hexed her ex, obviously, and he shows up back in the town and all these things keep happening to him, like really bad things, and she kind of realizes like, oh, maybe I actually did hex this poor guy, and she's kind of ends up having to help him. This one, plotline's totally different, but again, the vibes were similar. This one follows a girl who needs a job, and she sees an ad posting in the newspaper, and she thinks that the job is for a card game that she plays that's sort of along the lines of like Magic the Gathering. And so she applies thinking like, oh, I love the game, like it'd be so cool to work for them. And she ends up going to this like house, and she's like, okay, this is a weird place for an interview and whatever. And she ends up finding out that the job is actually to be a witch's familiar. And she's kind of like, okay, these people have kind of lost their minds. There's like this old lady who lives in the house who thinks she's a witch, and this girl is just like not having it. But this lady's nephew also is kind of in and out of the house. He lives there sometimes and sometimes he doesn't, but he's around a lot and he cannot stand this girl. She ends up taking the job because they offer her a ton of money, and she's like, you know what, if I have to pretend this lady's a witch and I'm getting paid this much, like who cares? So she takes the job and ends up working with her, and she's kind of slowly starting to see all these like little magical things happening. But it is such a good book. It's got like a whole like enemies to lovers arc because, like I said, this guy cannot stand her and thinks she's so annoying because she doesn't believe in magic and doesn't think anything they're talking about is real and all this stuff. And this was just like so interesting, and I really, really love this. And this like goes both ways too. Like if you've read this and really liked this, you might like this one. For sure, these are both really good, like spooky season reads if you are looking for that. I want to like do my Halloween videos a little bit earlier this year because I know people start like getting ready for Halloween in like September. So these two are really good if you're looking for like some early spooky season reads. Next is if you liked Beach Read by Emily Henry, you will probably like The Roughest Draft by Emily Wiberly and Austin Sigmund Broca. And they're very similar vibes. This one follows a girl who she ends up, I think her dad dies, and she gets his house, his like beach house, and she goes there to write a book. And there is this guy that she hated from college who is in the neighboring house also writing a book. And the two of them decide to sort of go on all these like field trips and like swap genres to just like get out of like their like writer's block or whatever. And so that's like this book is, that's what they do, is they go on all these little field trips and stuff. The Roughest Draft is similar in that it's also two authors, but it's two authors who were together as a couple and then kind of split, and now they have to come back together to write their final book for like the contract that they were under. And so now they're kind of back in this house together writing this book, and things sort of go from there. I feel like the vibes are very similar with like the two authors in like a vacation home, and like just like I said, the vibes are definitely there. This one's a little bit more depressing, I would say. It's got like some heavier topics in it that I don't remember The Roughest Draft having so much, but they're very like similar sort of, not like plot lines because it's obviously a little bit different in that that's like a second chance. This is like an enemies to lovers kind of thing, but the story itself just like gave the same sort of vibes, and I did really like both of them, so they're both really good. Next is if you liked Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter, you might like Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. I, for the life of me, cannot remember like what exactly it was that made me think that these two books were similar. I think it was just like the general like quirkiness almost of the girl, and the guy being the one to sort of understand that and embrace it instead of telling her she needed to change, or, you know, that she should be more normal or more this or that or whatever. Like, I think that was the vibe I was getting between the two. This one, if you haven't heard of it, I love this. This is my favorite YA book I've ever read. This one follows Liz and Wes, and Liz is trying to get the attention of Michael, I think it is, who is like this guy that used to live in their area and then moved away, and now he's moved back, and she's always had a crush on him, and Wes is helping her get his attention by fake dating her, but of course, you know, things just happen differently than you think they're going to happen. And so this was really, really cute. Like I said, my favorite YA book I've ever read. Really loved this. This one is Hazel and Josh, obviously. And these two, I think, were like best friends. I honestly want to say they were roommates, but I can't remember 100%. But she kind of dates all these guys, and she's like very out there in this book. Like, she's always kind of, you know, like if everybody else is sitting on the grass of the concert, she's like out there dancing by herself kind of thing. Like, she's always just kind of doing whatever she wants and doesn't care what anybody thinks of her. And she's dating all these guys that are constantly telling her like, why can't you stop doing that? Or why can't you just like sit down or whatever? And she's kind of like, oh, maybe I should stop doing all these things. And Josh is like, why? Like, do whatever the heck you want. And they sort of, I think, have the same vibes, like I said, where it's like other guys kind of tell the girl that they shouldn't be doing this, or maybe they should be doing that. And there's like this one guy that's like, no, you're like perfect the way you are kind of thing. And I feel like both of these books had those vibes. This is like an adult romance. This is YA, but did really like both of them. Definitely had the same, like, similar vibes going on. Next is if you liked The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata, you will probably like Terms and Conditions by Lauren Asher. This is the second book in the series, but you could totally read it on its own. These books gave me such similar vibes. I gave both of these 5 stars. Absolutely love them. Wall of Winnipeg and Me follows a girl who is an assistant to a professional football player who's kind of a jerk to her. Like, he doesn't really talk to her much. He doesn't really say anything. And one day she just quits because she's tired of him, like, he gets mad that, you know, another player's talking to her at practice or whatever, and she's kind of getting tired of him, like, getting mad at her for just, like, existing, basically. So she ends up quitting, and he ends up kind of coming crawling back to her, being like, no, I need you to come back, like, I can't do this without you, sort of thing. And this book follows Declan and Iris, and Declan needs to get married and have a baby to do his part in getting his inheritance. And he ends up with his assistant. And I feel like these both were very similar. They both have like a marriage of convenience sort of like deal where it's like, yes, we'll get married, but no, we're not gonna like be together or anything. And there's sort of that like tension of like, oh, is one falling for the other, or like is something more going on kind of thing. And they just like really gave me similar vibes. And especially like since both girls were the guy's assistants, I feel like it just had that like there was a workplace element to it, and then also like they were around each other like 24/7, because like obviously like being a football player's assistant, you're like following him around everywhere. And same with them in this book, like she was always working with him, and so they were constantly around each other. They both kind of had to move into the other one's house to make it look real, and they both were just like so well done. Like I said, really loved both of these. The Wall of Winnipeg is actually one of the few books that I have gone back and reread. I don't reread books often, but this one is one, and like for it to be this like chunky and me to actually like reread it is kind of a big deal. Granted, I've never read this physically. I've listened to the audiobook both times, but did really love both of these. Like I said, I gave these both 5 stars. Definitely similar vibes. Next, I feel like I haven't had this book off my shelf in so long, but this is If You Liked After by Anna Todd. You will probably like Hawk by Jessie Hall. I know this book has been hyped a lot as like, if you liked After, you'll like this, and I do think it's true. It's definitely got the same vibes. It's not as like crazy toxic as After is. It's obviously not nearly as long. After is like 5 huge books, but it definitely has like similar vibes. If you've never heard of After, which I feel like most people have, but maybe if you're new to booktube, you've never heard of it. After follows Tessa and Hardin. Hardin is like the bad boy of the campus, and Tessa is like the goody two-shoes, like has the perfect little like churchy boyfriend type thing. And Hardin is like, you know, the tattooed, like wearing all black, partying bad boy kind of thing. And she goes off to college and ends up meeting him and kind of is like intrigued by him and sort of goes from there. But it is 5 very long books of them going back and forth. Like, it's very toxic, it's very long, but it's very entertaining. And Hawk is sort of similar in that it's again a goody two-shoes kind of girl who lives with her churchy boyfriend that she's gonna marry and just like have their perfect little family sort of thing. And then all of a sudden this boyfriend is like, oh, we have a roommate now, and it's this guy who just got out of prison. And this girl is like, what do you mean? Like, you just randomly brought this guy into our house who just got out of prison to be our roommate? Like, doesn't that seem a little weird? And he doesn't really like tell her much. She's just like, nope, he's living with us. And she's just kind of like, okay. And that's kind of like where it starts. But she now has this like bad boy roommate that's across the hall. And it's like very similar vibes where like, you know, she's got the sort of like perfect boyfriend already, but she's now like realized that maybe there's like a whole other world out there with this other guy. And like definitely gave similar vibes. That one's a little bit, I don't want to say like older. I think they are older, and I mean I think they're out of college in that book, so maybe that's like an adult. This is more new adult. Like I said, it's definitely not as toxic as this is. This is also like, it's from Wattpad. It's a Harry Styles fan fiction originally, so like arguably the writing in Hawk is a little bit better than this. But I don't like saying that like a book's poorly written or anything, because like obviously I devoured this when I read it, and this was actually the first book that like, this was the first series that I read like romance wise that I was like, holy crap, this is good. And like that's what got me into like where I am now. Like I literally would not be here talking about books online without this book. So I feel like I don't want to say that it's poorly written, but it's not like the best written, you know? Like if I were to go back and read this now, I don't think I'd like it as much as I did, but it definitely like served its purpose and had its time. So did really enjoy this one. Also really enjoyed Hawk. Like I said, definite similar vibes with like the good girl bad boy thing and like, you know, the goody two shoes boyfriend and all of that. Very, very similar. Next, if you liked The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker, you will probably like the Chestnut Springs series by Elsie Silver. These are some of my favorite books of all time. I love The Simple Wild. If you've been on my channel for a while, you know this. I talk about this book all the time because I'm obsessed with it. And one of the things I love about it the most is that the side characters are just as interesting as the main couple. And this series, I find the same thing. Like, I love the side characters. I know them by name. I know who each one is. And that's like a lot for me, I feel like. Because a lot of times I read books and all the side characters just kind of blur together. So for me to actually be like, oh no, this is the one that's the neighbor and this is the one that does this. And like, to actually visualize them as real people is like a big deal for me. So The Simple Wild follows a girl who basically gets a call one day that her dad in Alaska is sick and she should come visit him. And she's like in her 20s. She just got fired and she's kind of like, okay, I have nothing better to do. I guess I'll go see him. She hasn't been there since she was like a year old, hasn't seen her dad since. She decides to fly out there. Her dad runs a like airline in Alaska. And so she flies in and he sends one of his pilots to come pick her up. And it is Jonah that comes to pick her up, and he is like super crabby about it. He thinks she's like this high maintenance city girl, thinks it's like stupid that she hasn't ever come to visit her dad, and just like has all of these like judgmental like sort of thoughts about her before he even meets her. And so he's kind of a jerk to her when they meet. And even throughout like the first parts of this book, like there's a definite like enemies to lovers arc. Like they cannot stand each other at the beginning. And I really loved this book. And like I said, what really made this for me was that the side characters are just as interesting, and like you really feel like the whole community, like you kind of get a sense for the whole thing. And I felt the same way with Flawless and like the whole series. In Flawless, we're following a bull rider named Rhett who has had some like publicity issues. And because of that, his agent sends his daughter Summer to go like babysit him basically. When I like read the synopsis for this, I did not realize she would be basically moving in with him. Like I just sort of figured she would accompany him to events and that would be that. But she literally moves in on the ranch with him. And I just think like the whole family in this series is so like real to me. Like they feel like real people. And even like the side characters that are around, you just really like get to know them really well. And I really like that. And that reminded me a lot of this book where you just feel like you know them and like you've actually met them. And that is always like a sign of like a really good book for me. So I really loved both of these and they both gave me that vibe. Next is if you liked God of Malice by Rina Kent, you'll probably like Fear Me by B.B. Reed. God of Malice is like a very, like the guy in it is like psychotic. Like that is blatantly stated in the book. And so he's just like doing all kinds of crazy things. And you like while reading it, you're like, okay, this would probably never happen. But you're also so entertained that you don't care. And Fear Me is kind of the same way. Fear Me is like one of the most insane bully romances I've ever read in my entire life. But it is so like the vibes are just so similar where like, you know, the dude is like nuts, but there's also like some like underlying thing going on that you're trying to figure out. And they both just, like I said, they gave me like really similar vibes. Both guys are kind of crazy. The things that happen in the book are kind of crazy, and they just like really reminded me of each other. I think they're like very similar. If you like bully romances and like darker stuff, I think these two go together really well. Next is if you like Den of Vipers by K.A. Knight, you would probably like Sick Boys by Clarissa Wilde. Den of Vipers is a very, very large book that is like 80% mafia smut, basically. It is a very long book for what it is, but it is also another book that's just like super crazy. It is reverse harem, so I think there's 3 guys in that one and then 1 girl. And Sick Boys is kind of similar, but like younger, I would say. I always say it's like the bully romance equivalent to Den of Vipers. It's got probably the same level of smut, but it's like new adult college, and it follows a girl whose sister jumps off a cliff and leaves her a note saying, stay away from these boys at this university. So of course the sister is like, well, now I'm going to go to the university and find these boys and figure out, you know, what happened to my sister. And so she goes and she meets the boys and kind of ends up like in this deal with them. And again, there's 3 guys. This one just like gave me such similar vibes, just like in content wise, like the smut to plot ratio, and also just like the general vibes of like sheer craziness of what was happening was very reminiscent of Den of Vipers. So I think they're very similar. If you like that kind of book, I think you would like, you know, the other one if you've only read one of them. Next is if you liked Powerless by Elsie Silver, I think you would like In a Jam by Kate Canterbury. These are both very popular. I gave both of these 5 stars as well. Really, really loved them. Powerless follows Jasper and Sloane, and they have kind of always had this like thing going on, you know. Sloane was always a little bit younger, so she has had a crush on Jasper for years, but anytime that she sort of hinted at it to him, he would get like weirded out because she'd be like 17 and he was 24, and he's like, oh, this is like a weird age gap like at this point. And so nothing ever like came of it, and now she is engaged to another guy and ends up leaving him on the wedding day, and Jasper helps her escape, and they end up on a like summer road trip together to just kind of get away from their lives. And I really loved this one. It's got like a strong like best friends to lovers, because even like though they never got together, they were still like best friends. And In a Jam kind of reminded me a lot of that. It's a little bit different. They are both small town romances. This one follows Shay and Noah, and Shay ends up finding out that she's inheriting her step-grandmother's tulip farm, which she spent a lot of time on as a kid, and Noah's family owned the farm beside it, so they kind of knew each other growing up. They were like really good friends, and they both went off different directions for college, and now they're both back, and she needs to get married to inherit the farm within a year, and she also has to live on the farm for a year. And so she ends up back there, and Noah is back there at his own farm, and he's also become the guardian to his niece, so he's like a single dad now. And these two just reminded me a lot of each other, because I think they both had like really strong friendships prior to their relationship. Like you could just really see that they were like really good friends. And then like the small town vibes for sure was like very similar between the two. I really loved both of these. Like I said, gave them both 5 stars. Really, really good if you're looking for small town romances that are like best friends to lovers. And so that is everything for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. I do new book videos every single week, and I will see you next time.